Hey, Word of Lifers, Nick here, and we are bringing you a special edition episode. Yeah, a little bit of a collaboration with our good buddies, the boys over at the wildly successful, highly touted CLB Forge podcast. It was honestly a ton of fun for both Jay and I, and we've been guests on their show before, and we'll put links in the description to those episodes. This one is dropping today is May 4th, 2021, which is also the same day the Forge is dropping our conversation with them over on their feed. So please go and check that out as well. What you are about to hear is a little behind the scenes on how they got started and how that influenced how we're doing the Word of Life podcast. Anyways, before I go, let me give you a little bit of a bio on both of these guys. Dr. Ryan Nielsen is the Associate Director of North American Missions with the Church of the Lutheran Brethren and is based out in Connecticut, but we don't hold it against him. And Pastor Michael Natal is the lead pastor at Faith Chapel, which is located in Cranston, Rhode Island, which, if you're up to speed on your Pastor Jason Lang trivia, happens to be one of his former churches. Small world. Anyways, it's time for this intro to end, but please enjoy the conversation and go check out the Forge. Okay, Word of Life. Love y'all. Bye.
Welcome to the Word of Life podcast, a ministry of Word of Life Church located in LeSueur, Minnesota. From sermon audio to midweek content and much more. We hope you are blessed by what you hear. For more information or to donate, please visit wordoflifemn.com. Now, enjoy this week's episode.
So, like we said at the beginning of this, is that this is a real kind of collaboration between the CLB Forge podcast and the Word of Life podcast. We were trying to figure out what this mashup looks like, and it just makes me think of what was the old ad for Reese's peanut butter cups? Is peanut butter and chocolate, two great tastes that taste great together. I think that's what we've got going here.
That's good.
Nice.
That's awesome.
So I don't know who's peanut butter and who's chocolate, but that's whatever. Anyway, so one of the questions that we have though for you guys is, I don't know if y'all know, we started the Word of Life podcast. One of our inspirations was seeing the work that you guys were doing on the Forge. And we wanted to hear a little bit of the backstory of where was the Forge forged out of and what kind of impact you guys are seeing it have today.
Yeah. Well, I think the probably goes back 7-8 years ago. I started to study when I was doing my doctoral work. I started to really study what's happening with the church in North America, the struggles it faced, why so many churches were dying and declining. And the short answer is, I can spare you from reading my 300-page most boring book ever written. When churches lose sight of God's mission and they become inwardly focused, they lose sight of the mission field that God's placed them in. And that just really became captivated and energized by understanding the importance of returning to our mission. And that means, in a huge way, planting new churches, which is my job working for North American Mission. I oversee our church planting efforts, church multiplication, helping churches add campuses like what you guys are doing. And then also helping churches re-engage with their mission to bring more vitality to established churches. The established church is huge. It's a powerful ministry. Established churches were better positioned to weather the pandemic than church plants. And there's just a huge opportunity to engage in God's mission. So I've been thinking about this kind of stuff for 7-8 years. I've always loved podcasts since since they became a thing. And it's come in the back of my mind. I've thought, like, wow, there's a lot of potential here. There's so many things that we do in life as we commute, do chores. things that, we can put in some earbuds and listen to a show and learn something as we're doing that. So I've known there's a lot of potential around it. About a year and a half ago, I started working for the CLB, for North American Mission. I was a parish pastor up until then. And, so we used some digital ministry. Like we had an audio podcast for sermons. That's about it. Then I started working for North American Mission. 6 months into that, the pandemic hit. And so, I took the lead on our COVID response stuff. And, I had some long-term dreams for some things that we would do down the road, including a podcast. And I realized, okay, there's so many things we can no longer do right now. This is the time to get going on this. And I had a friend who had a show, and who had started up a podcast. His name was Phil Havens, and he had a podcast called Bow Hunting Freedom. And it was about helping people find careers in the bow hunting industry. So I got to watch him start this thing up from scratch, produce 100 episodes. He just had a great run. It was an amazing thing to watch. So when we were thinking about doing this, I went back to him and got some advice from him. We have some people in the LB that have done podcasts. I picked their brains. And so I learned, I had these long checklists I made for myself to learn how to do this step by step. Learning how to produce episodes, things like that. And early on, I talked to Mike to see if he would be a good co-host, or to see if he would be a co-host. I know he'd be a good one. And Mike, what'd you say?
That'd be sweet. Is that what I said? I don't know. I just thought that'd be sweet. So.
I realize this is getting really long and boring. But here's the good part. So wow. I thought, I knew some of the shows I listened to had a co-host, and it would be so boring if it was just me. And so I asked Mike, would you do this with me? We're ministry friends. Our friendship's been growing more and more the longer we serve about 2 hours away from each other. Mike said yes. And so let me just give you a story about what a big deal this is. So when we were getting ready to do this, I was telling a fellow pastor out in the East Coast here, like, hey, yeah, I'm getting a podcast going. And he's kind of like, oh yeah, like kind of politely interested, like, oh yeah, good for you. That's so nice. And I said, yeah. And Mike Natal's gonna be my co-host. His eyes widened. He said, oh, really? Immediately pulled out his phone and said, what's it called? So Mike is why people listen.
Well, I mean, I wouldn't go that far.
Okay, I'll go that far though.
All right.
And then last thing,
Lindsay's probably going to edit that out because she knows better than to leave that in. So she doesn't want any of that on record.
Yeah, it's the name comes from, so we had a plan. We knew the purpose, the plan. We worked out a schedule, and the last thing we had to figure out was the name. And so our name comes from another project that's rolling out. That is going to be rolling out this coming summer from North American Mission. And it's a resource website, a resource sharing website called the CLB Forge. And so our podcast is going to have a home on that site. So
that's cool.
So we rolled this out about a year before that, but that's coming. And the idea is that it's a place for equipping. Like a forge is where you create tools, and we want to do that for churches.
We'll be right back to our episode, but first, here's some show and tell.
Hey, podcast listeners, we're going to take a quick break from this episode on a more serious conversation with Mike and Ryan from the Forge podcast. But because it's a Word of Life podcast, it's another installation, another exhibition, another segment of our show and tell. And Jay, you're going to be the first one. What did you bring to show and tell this week?
I brought for show and tell my buddy Nick Sinclair, who is my tattoo artist. He's in Zumbrota, Minnesota, which is just north of Rochester. I did recently get a couple of new tattoos, but he also, you don't have to get tattoos to be supported by Nick Sinclair. He also does stickers. And let me tell you a little something about Nick, and it's super, super cool. Nick loves Jesus. Nick loves Jesus, and their ministry through their tattoo shop is they host a Saturday morning Bible study that's open to everyone. And on their website, they have testimonies of people who have been impacted by the gospel of Jesus Christ, and he's sharing that honestly and openly on his website. He's sharing it in his tattoo shop, and front and center when you come in is a big, giant, audacious Jesus with a bloody cross, because he loves to tell people about what Jesus has done for them. And so big shout out to my buddy Nick Sinclair. And if you're looking for a tattoo or some really killer stickers, he's got this John 3:16 one right here. Then we'll add a link in our bio.
Good. And because this is a collaboration podcast, we would be remiss if we didn't invite Mike and Ryan to show and tell. So, Mike,
Yeah.
what did you bring to show and tell this week?
And show and tell, I wish I actually could bring both of them, but they are so large that I was unable to. So for Christmas and for my birthday, I got two really cool gifts. So I've been trying to intentionally get things in that I can use in order to minister to other people. And so for Christmas, my family teamed up and they got me an Uni pizza oven. And it rocks, dude. And so what's so cool about this pizza oven is that it's not only portable, but it makes really, really, really good pizza. And so like what's really cool is making pizza with others and having the opportunity to talk while you're making pizza and get to know people while you're doing it and cooking it for them, and then watching them enjoy what they just put together themselves, and then relating it to our relationship with Christ in the way that he creates us. And then not only does he create us, but he gets to enjoy us in the same way that we get to enjoy what we put together as well on our pizza. Then for my birthday, my family, once again, because they did such a great job pooling their resources, they pooled their resources to get me a DeWalt miter saw. It's the most insane thing ever. And so what's really cool about that is now that gives me another opportunity to have people over to do different aspects of life, build for someone, produce for someone, and just sit around and create out of the resources that God has given to us, and have the opportunity to talk to people about it, and then even to like gift things that we've made. And so those are my two show and tell: Uni pizza oven and a DeWalt miter saw. A little bit pricey, but like I said, if you have a family who could pool in all together, totally reasonable and attainable.
Love it. Love it. Very good. All right, Ryan, you're up. What'd you bring to show and tell this week?
All right. Well, I got two things for you, and you can use them both or cut one, whatever you want to do. So first one is it's actually a book on my nightstand right now. It's called The Common Rule, Habits of Purpose for an Age of Distraction by Justin Earley. And it's been really good for me. It's a book about the common rules, this kind of ancient spiritual practice, but the word doesn't come from like rules, laws to follow. It's referring to a Latin word that actually means like a trellis, like you would grow things on your garden. And it's something I've been reading that's been helping me establish new spiritual rhythms in my life that just aid my walk as a discipleship with Jesus. So in an age of digital distraction, in an age of pandemic distraction, it's been just what I needed. And I think when the pandemic hit, I just, found myself working more and more and more, and found it easier and easier to be distracted from my walk with the Lord. So that book has been really good for me, and I'm toying with the idea of like pulling a group of guys together to go through it. The other one that's maybe less serious is my mountaineering axe.
Hey,
In my office.
Wow, that's awesome.
And it's my Black Diamond mountaineering axe. I had it on a trip last week and last Saturday, and I'm taking it out again next week. So I love hiking in the mountains, and it's fun to hike in the winter. And just having a reason to walk around with something like this is just feels great.
Have you traversed an icy
really
mountainside
cool.
using that?
Yeah.
Solid.
It
Dude.
feels pretty cool. It's useless 99.999% of my life, but on those few trips, it's a lot of fun. So
Nice.
I can hear Bear Grylls in my head just be like, "You're gonna need this to get across a crevasse." Have you gotten across a crevasse?
Yeah.
Yeah, perfect.
Yep.
Perfect.
Yeah. I'm not sure if I'm gonna be dropped off by a helicopter with only a mountaineering axe and a wolf skin and survive for 2 weeks.
You're gonna have to make your own clip-ons.
Oh man, Lindsay,
Naked and Afraid, CLB Forge Edition.
Oh, Lindsay, right there. That's the snippet to start the podcast with. That accent that Ryan just did. I don't even know what it was. It was kind of English, kind of.
It was
Who even
a
knows?
disaster is what it
Nice.
was. There's no
That's the
real
starter
accent.
right there.
Oh shoot.
Well, he is a part of, Cultivate New England, so maybe it's New English.
New English. That's true.
Oh.
Yeah.
There you go.
Yep.
Yeah, like
All right. This one I'm bringing this week. In December we recommended the Mockingbird devotionals that have just come out, and so I'm kind of going back to the well on this a little bit. But I got a picture from my office recently. And I know this is you have to see the video on this, but if you're only joining us on audio, this is Norman Rockwell's pink. It's a print, but it's "Lift Up Thine Eyes." If you hadn't seen this picture. The reason why I bring up the Mockingbird, as we're talking about the kind of impact that digital ministry can have on someone, the digital ministry of Mockingbird has been very impactful on me. And I heard in one of their podcasts, Dave Zoll preach a sermon that had to do with that picture. And that sermon was so impactful on me that I went online that day, bought the picture for myself so that I could have it as a reminder in my office of kind of similar conversation that Ryan's having about the kind of life draining that is digital distraction. Lift up thine eyes to the Lord. And so anyway, my show and tell this week is Mockingbird. You can check out their podcast, their website, books, all that stuff. So yeah, well, hey guys, thanks for doing this. And listeners, we'll get back to the show.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting to be on this side of things, like to be asked. I'm used to asking the questions and then just engaging with the people. So answering is a little different. It's very different. I would say from our standpoint, it's just been great to hear the encouragement from people, but not just like people who I would assume would listen to, but to like randomly hear from people where I'd be like, you're actually listening to this? Like that was probably the most amazing thing for me. And I think that it changes, and the more so the cool part is, and I love hearing this about you guys at Word of Life, is like the podcast is multifaceted in terms of like there's different topics that get covered, and depending upon the topic is like a hook for people. And I can remember that as I started getting into like watching YouTube videos or watching different podcasts and stuff, and they would go along with like my passions. And if you could hook me on one, chances are I'm going to go backwards and now retroactively listen to all the stuff that I missed. And so like for us, I feel like that's a huge turning point for us, is that we've had such an eclectic group of guests and of topics that it's reached out to so many more people that I didn't even expect it to. And I'm sure you guys are doing that too. Like, I love one of the things that I started that I think I'm going to start adapting into our church is the idea of doing like little recordings of people in our church, just allowing them to tell their stories and putting that up on our church website or on Facebook and seeing where that goes, because that I want to share this video with someone else. And that is the hook to then have them go backwards and listen. So like one of the ones that I never would have thought would have listened was like Brad Hoganson's daughter reached out to us when we did the PK episode. And I was like, whoa, wait, what? Like you're listening to this? And so, and it's great. Or like even one of the most recent episodes that we did was Ben Hosh. And Ben Hosh was the associate pastor at Stavanger when he was out pastoring. And Stavanger then shared the podcast. And now we have new listeners to the podcast because of Stavanger. And so like each opportunity that we have to do different aspects of ministry brings in new people who then go backwards and listen. And I'm sure you guys are noticing that too. So that's been like a really interesting avenue. And just to hear from people, like when we get together with them, or when we reach out to people to do like, hey, we're thinking maybe you'd be a good guest. And they're like, oh, I've been waiting for you to like ask me, and I'm so excited to be on it. And I'm like, oh, this is great to kind of hear people's excitement about it. Like, because it's, especially during COVID, this is the connection that people are craving. And we missed out on convention last year, and we missed out on, you know, the togetherness that the church really feels during those, during that week together. And I feel like not completely, but at least partially, the podcast has kind of filled in that gap that people were craving over that amount of time in COVID. And I was really appreciative to hear that from so many people. So I think that's the difference that it's making and what really spurs me on. And I just love working with Ryan too. He, as you can tell, like Ryan held up a whole bunch of pieces of paper of all the work that he put in, and I get to just bask in Ryan's detail. And it's a huge blessing for me. So like Ryan talks about how he gets to use my name and people get excited to listen to the podcast. Well, like the only reason why we even have a podcast is because of Ryan. So like, good, I can record and I have a decent voice and I have a good sense of humor. But if it wasn't for Ryan, nobody would hear that. And if it wasn't for Ryan, there'd be no details of, he knows, like today we were talking about this. Well, when's this episode going to drop? I don't know the answer to that question. But Ryan knew, and he could get it for us in seconds. And then I was able to make a joke of it in the beginning of the podcast, which Ryan does a great job of using his resources to make other people look good. And that's exactly what the Forge is all about, using the resources in order to make other people equipped to do ministry, not to glorify Ryan, but to glorify the Lord. And that's what it's all about. That's what the Forge is all about.
And it's been effective. It's been effective. I mean, that's what hooked me on the Forge, honestly. Like, I don't know which podcast was my first one, but I was driving, put on the Forge, and I was listening to you were talking to some guest, and then it went straight into the Church on Track, and I the first one was Derailer number 2, and Derailer number 2 then caused me to okay, I need to go back to Derailer number 1. And so now I just kind of keep on with the church. I'll confess, I don't listen to every single guest, but I listen to all of those Church on Track ones. And so because that's the kind of tools that we need in the church. And so the Forge is forging tools.
Mm-hmm. That's awesome to hear. I know.
Yep.
And I do honestly think that one my primary ministry passion is helping other people succeed in the calling God's placed in their lives. Like, I just love doing that. So that's so cool to hear you guys share that. I think one of my favorite stories too is like Ben Hosh, one of our recent guests. when his episode aired, he shared it with like his Facebook support group, and he said the show has helped him. And he's a missionary in Taiwan, on the other side of the planet. It's helped him stay connected to his church family.
I get that.
Oh,
I get that because we have a church member who lives in Bangkok, and he's a part of our online campus.
wild.
Yeah.
And so Nick's got family in Minot. Nick's got family in Minot, and they're a part of our online campus. I've got friends in Jersey. They're a part of our online campus. And I think that what these tools do, and once they're, kind of like sent out there by friends, is they also end up connecting people, to the tools as well as connecting them to the gospel that they need to hear.